Hey there, welcome to your deep dive. Looks like we're diving into the world of cryptocurrency today, and specifically how it measures up to Islamic financial principles.
It's a fascinating area to explore.
It really is. We're talking Bitcoin, Ethereum, even digital dinars. You've clearly been thinking about this, and you even sent over this YouTube video, Is Crypto Halal or Haram? From the channel Saraf, Halal Crypto.
I saw that one. It features Dr. Farooq, a scholar, and it really gets into some thought-provoking stuff about Islamic finance and crypto.
Absolutely. So to kick things off, you mentioned you're trying to figure out if investing in crypto aligns with the whole concept of halal investing. And one of the first things that comes to mind is, how does crypto fit into the Islamic view of property? What even makes something permissible mal in this digital age?
Such a key question, right? Dr. Farooq really hones in on those four characteristics of mal in Islamic finance: commercial value, ownership, possession, and transferability.
Yeah, those are the pillars. But this is where it gets kind of tricky with crypto because it's not like a physical object you can hold.
Exactly. That's the thing. It exists purely in the digital world. So how do those four characteristics actually apply?
Right. You can't exactly hold a Bitcoin in your hand.
You see, it's not about the physical form. It's about the inherent value and whether that aligns with Islamic guidelines. That's where the concept of manfa'a comes in, the permissible benefit that you derive from something.
Manfa'a. Okay. So how does that apply to, say, owning Bitcoin?
Think of it like this. Let's say you've got a utility token. That token itself might not be the main value, but it gives you access to services on a specific network. Could be data storage, processing power, whatever it may be. That access, that utility, that's the manfa'a.
I'm starting to see how Islamic scholars are approaching this. So it's not just about the token itself, but the benefit or the use you get from it.
Precisely. And this leads us to another layer, the tech behind it all, blockchain. This whole decentralized system, a public ledger that records every single transaction.
Yeah. All those miners verifying transactions, new Bitcoins getting created, pretty complex stuff. So would blockchain tech itself be considered halal?
That's a big question a lot of people have. And the general consensus, at least from what I've gathered, is that blockchain as a tech isn't inherently haram.
You know, I've heard some people argue that the very nature of blockchain, being decentralized with no central control, that it actually aligns with Islamic principles of fairness and transparency.
That's a really insightful point. It's a point of much discussion among scholars, for sure. Some do see that lack of central control as aligning with Islamic values. Fairness and transparency in financial dealings, that's core to Islam. However...
Hold on, before we get to the howevers, I just want to make sure I'm with you. We're saying that, similar to traditional assets, you need to look at the underlying purpose, the function of a cryptocurrency and its tech to figure out its halal status. It's not a black and white answer, is it?
Exactly, it's about understanding the nuances and applying Islamic principles to this new tech.
Got it, okay. So what about those howevers you were about to mention? What are some of the counter-arguments?
Well, there are scholars who argue that the lack of a central authority, while it might sound good in theory, could actually lead to instability, a lack of accountability. And they believe that some sort of central authority, as long as it operates within Islamic guidelines, is actually crucial for making sure things are ethical and preventing harm.
Interesting. So it's not just about decentralization as a concept, but how it actually works in practice and whether it truly upholds those ethical considerations that Islamic finance cares about. We're really trying to reconcile these cutting-edge technologies with centuries-old principles.
You got it. And this is where it gets even more complex when you start looking at specific cryptocurrencies and trading practices through this Islamic finance lens. There are a lot of factors to consider.
I bet. And that's something I'm really curious to dig into more. But before we do, can we take a step back for a moment and look at the historical context? Like, how did money and financial systems actually work in those early Islamic societies? It might give us some clues about how crypto might be viewed.
Absolutely. Understanding that historical context of Islamic finance can be so insightful for applying these principles to new situations. You've heard of digital dinars, right?
Oh, yeah. Everyone's talking about digital dinars these days. But I got to admit, I don't really know much about them or how they connect to Islamic finance. What's the story there?
Well, the idea of digital dinars is super interesting because it actually links back to how currency was used in early Islamic societies. You know, we often picture those gold and silver coins, dinars and dirhams, as the main currencies back then. And you're right, they were. But even back then, Muslims used currencies from other governments too. It wasn't always about having that Islamic authority backing it directly. It was more about the currency's stability, how well it facilitated trade and economic activity, all within that framework of Islamic principles.
Wow, I never knew that. So it kind of challenges this assumption that a currency needs to be tied to a specific Islamic government or institution to be considered halal. It's not so black and white.
Right. It really comes down to whether the currency itself, how it's used, its function, if that aligns with Islamic principles. That's where the analysis gets interesting. Which brings us back to the big question, where do cryptocurrencies fit in? They're not backed by governments in the traditional sense, and their value can be all over the place. That's got to raise some eyebrows when it comes to uncertainty and speculation.
Yeah, that's a great point. And speaking of uncertainty, one argument I hear a lot against Bitcoin specifically is that gold has intrinsic value. There's something tangible there. Bitcoin.value. It's all just ones and zeros, data floating around. What even gives it worth? Is it all perceived value, hype, and speculation?
That's where Dr. Farooq's perspective in that video you sent is really intriguing. He digs into this idea that even gold, its value isn't just about those practical uses, like industrial stuff, electronics. He argues that a lot of it comes down to demand, social perception, which, when you think about it, isn't that different from how some people see Bitcoin.
So you're saying gold's value isn't as fixed as we might think. It's subject to market forces too, just like Bitcoin.
Exactly. Think about it. The price of gold goes up and down based on supply and demand, investor sentiment, even global events. And Bitcoin, other cryptocurrencies, they're all part of that same dance, susceptible to volatility, speculation, the whole nine yards.
That makes sense. It's not like there's this set-in-stone value for gold just sitting around somewhere. So if both of them are subject to these market forces, what are scholars saying about the actual trading of crypto? I mean, people are buying and selling Bitcoin just like they do with gold. Are there any guidelines, concerns about that from an Islamic perspective?
Great question. And yeah, you're right. That whole trading side of crypto needs a closer look through the lens of Islamic finance. There are some things to consider there.
Yeah, because in the crypto world, there's a whole bunch of different ways to trade. You've got spot trading, which I guess is the most straightforward way to buy and sell. But then there's shorts, margins, futures. It's a lot. So how do you even begin to figure out if any of these methods fit with halal guidelines?
You're telling me. The crypto world definitely has its own lingo when it comes to trading. And not all of it's created equal, especially when you're looking at it through the lens of Islamic finance. Often, it boils down to a few main principles. Avoiding interest, which is also known as riba, steering clear of excessive uncertainty, kind of like gambling, that's gharar, and making sure there's a genuine transfer of ownership happening.
Those principles make sense in general, but can you give me an example of how they'd actually apply to those different crypto trading methods? Like, let's start with spot trading, since it seems like that's the easiest one.
Sure. Spot trading is usually seen as the most straightforward and often the least problematic from an Islamic viewpoint. You're buying or selling the cryptocurrency at that moment's market price. Simple as that. You're taking ownership, no interest involved. Pretty clean.
Yeah, that seems to line up with those principles you mentioned. What about something like futures contracts, though? I've heard those can be a bit more complicated. What are they, and what are the issues there?
Futures contracts definitely get a little more complex. Basically, with a futures contract, you're agreeing to buy or sell a certain amount of cryptocurrency at a price you've already agreed on, but at a date in the future.
So you're kind of betting on whether the price will go up or down later, right?
That's the gist. And that's where it gets a little blurry from an Islamic finance perspective. Futures contracts often involve speculating on those price movements without actually owning the asset itself. You're basically betting on future market sentiment, and that brings up concerns about gharar, that excessive uncertainty. It starts to look a bit like gambling, which is a big no-no in Islam.
Because it goes against avoiding that gharar. Excessive risk, like gambling.
Yeah.
So it's not just the asset itself, it's how you're trading it, whether that involves things that are considered haram.
Exactly. This is where it's super important to not only understand how the different crypto trading methods work, but also to consult with Islamic scholars who really specialize in this stuff. There's no single answer that fits every situation, and interpretations can differ.
That's a good reminder. It's important to remember that we're not Islamic scholars here. It's always best to get guidance from those who've really dedicated themselves to studying and interpreting these principles. We've talked about spot trading and futures. What about some of these other ones, like Margin trading.
Margin trading. That one tends to raise red flags in Islamic finance because it usually involves borrowing funds to increase your buying power.
Makes sense why that would be an issue. Isn't borrowing usually tied to interest? And that's a no-go in Islamic finance, right?
Exactly. Interest, or riba, as it's known, is strictly forbidden in Islam. And even though some platforms might say they offer interest-free margin trading, it's crucial to really dig into the fine print, the terms and conditions. There could be hidden fees or ways it's structured that actually still go against Islamic principles.
So it's like you really got to do your homework, read the fine print, and understand what's going on behind the scenes to know if something truly aligns with halal guidelines.
100%. You can't just rely on labels or marketing. Transparency and truly understanding those financial tools are so important.
It sounds like navigating the world of crypto trading and sticking to Islamic principles requires a lot of research, due diligence, and probably talking to experts. It's not as easy as buying some Bitcoin and hoping for the best.
You hit the nail on the head. It's about aligning those financial decisions with your values and beliefs. And sometimes that means going the extra mile to make sure your actions are permissible and ethical.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But with all this talk about how complex it is, all the potential pitfalls of crypto, is there anything about the crypto world that's generally seen as good, potentially beneficial from that Islamic perspective?
Such a good question. It's easy to get caught up in all the haram aspects, but there's a whole other side to this conversation. Some people argue that certain parts of crypto and blockchain tech actually have a lot of potential when you see them through the lens of Islamic values.
Really? Like what kind of positive stuff are we talking?
Well, there's zakat, for one. Charitable giving, one of the 5 pillars of Islam. Some believe that blockchain tech, because it's so transparent, so traceable, that it could change the whole game when it comes to charitable giving.
I can see that. With blockchain, it'd be a lot easier to track donations, make sure things are accountable, and prevent things like fraud or mismanagement of those funds.
Exactly. And it's not just zakat either. There's also the potential for Islamic finance to have a bigger role in the crypto world. We're already seeing Islamic crypto exchanges and investment funds popping up that follow Sharia-compliant principles.
So it's not just individuals trying to figure out if their own crypto stuff is halal. It's becoming a whole ecosystem. It's trying to build a more ethical, more inclusive financial system within the crypto world. That's amazing.
It is. And it's just the beginning. There's still so much to figure out to understand about how Islamic principles and values can shape the future of finance and tech. It's exciting.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface, but it's obvious that this whole intersection of Islam and cryptocurrency is a wild ride. Lots of challenges, but tons of opportunities too.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's up to each person to do their research, to make their own informed choices that fit with their faith and values.
Couldn't agree more. And I think that's a great note to kind of wrap things up. I feel like we've been on this crazy journey. We started with what is halal, like the very basics, and we just dove headfirst into this whole world of cryptocurrency.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is. Digital dinars, blockchain, ethical trading practices. I mean, wow, we've covered so much ground.
It just goes to show how relevant these ancient, well, not ancient, but, these long-standing principles are. They matter even, especially in this digital world that's changing so fast. It's not about being anti-tech. It's about approaching it thoughtfully.
Exactly. And what's amazing is this isn't just some theoretical debate. It's affecting how people manage their money, invest, even how they approach giving to charity. Like right now, today.
It's real. So for everyone listening, as you keep digging into this intersection of Islam and cryptocurrency, remember what we talked about today.
Yeah.
Don't just take our word for it. Think critically, ask questions, and don't be afraid to reach out to those trusted scholars and experts for guidance.
And keep in mind, this whole space is constantly evolving. New crypto projects are launching all the time. New interpretations are popping up. Discussions are happening. Staying informed, staying engaged, that's key.
Couldn't have said it better myself. This has been an awesome, really fascinating deep dive with you. Thank you.
The pleasure was all mine, truly.
And to you, dear listener, as you continue your own exploration, we'd love to hear from you. What really stuck with you from our conversation? What new questions popped up for you? Keep exploring, keep learning, and until next time, happy diving, everybody.